What are you? Can I touch your hair? Where are you from? Say something in Spanish. And you act white. These are just some of the few questions and statements that have been directed towards me on multiple occasions, which is why the microculture of being multiracial is relevant. As you can probably imagine, it can be extremely frustrating to an individual to have these questions asked of you on a daily basis or even on a regular basis. I am glad to answer them though, to dispel some of the ignorance around these questions and comments. What are you may ask? Well, first and foremost, I am a human. And secondly, I am a biracial mix between African American and white, which includes German, Italian, Hungarian, and much, much more. Can you touch my hair? Personally, I don't mind, but always make sure to ask, and it should probably be a question posed to someone that you know personally. Where am I from? I'm born and raised in New Jersey. I'm from nowhere else on the continent or the world or any country. You act white. This is probably the most frustrating comment I get because it's such a vague statement. Am I acting white because I speak proper English? Is it because I dress a certain way? Or is it because I act a certain way? I don't think any of those things determine my racial identity, and this is certainly not a comment that you want to make to any multiracial person because the intent can be easily misconstrued and it's a horrible descriptor of anyone. Why is this considered a microculture, you may ask? Number one, we have physical traits that make us stand out. Being mixed race is a microculture, and the reason being is that we come with a unique set of genetic traits, usually being a shade of color between your mother and your father. In my case, my mom was white and my dad was black. Therefore, I am a light shade of brown. Specifically, being black and white, my hair is a texture that is somewhere between straight and kinky. And of course, there's no regularity in terms of genetic traits you get because you can be Asian and white, Asian and black, Black and Native American, white and Native American. There's such a huge spectrum of characteristics that mixed kids have in terms of opportunity for their gene pool. Number two, it is not voluntary. It is obviously not voluntary for anyone to choose what their race or their ethnicity is. You are simply born this way, as Lady Gaga would say. Number three, we are aware of our subordinate status. Being a mixed race automatically makes you more susceptible to race discrimination. Because I am often seen as Black American or Latina, I am automatically considered a minority and not a part of the most powerful group of people in America, which are white males in the United States. And it's important to note that in the 1980s, it was assumed that biracial individuals should adopt the same race of their parent of color. This assumption was based on the historical mandate of the one-drop rule, as you all remember from history class, which stated that any individual with any African ancestry would be considered a member of the Black race. And therefore, if a biracial individual resisted being categorized as Black, the individual was seen as someone with a mental illness. But eventually, thankfully, multiracial individuals began to challenge this assumption, which led to research, new concepts of biracial identity development, and multiracial identity development, of course, and inclusion of the biracial option on the census. And then also, we experience negative social reactions. Most interracial families are to enter into psychological treatment for reasons generally other for race, but most have experienced some sort of social disapproval at some point in their life. They're likely to possess some memories of unkind stares, questioning by others, family disapproval, which I have experienced personally from white individuals that are part of my family, and the feelings of uncertainty and discomfort or just outright racism. So we are on to the next point. So next, the values that are unique to the multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic individual are some of the values we have. One of the most important values is perhaps diversity, which is heavily associated with the multicultural identity. And this seems like a given, especially since a racially mixed person is seen as someone who is diverse in genes and culture, because being mixed race is a product of two very different people coming together, making a child. You often see your parents having to navigate the intricacies of being with someone who's very different than themselves. Therefore, being a mixed child allows you to have more access to knowing how to deal with those different than you, since you've seen and experienced this at a young age between your parents' interactions. Secondly, another big value of being a multicultural individual is open-mindedness, as some of you would guess. We value open-mindedness because the very fact that we're mixed challenges the social construct of race at its core. And also being open to the fact that it's okay to be different helps with the exacerbated identity struggle of a mixed person, that we are stuck between two worlds. Thirdly, acceptance, as you can probably conclude to, would be a part of our value set. In the US, it's important to note that most interracial relationships that were something that needed to be decriminalized, but the process, even though the process has been slow, it wasn't until 2000 that multiracial Americans could identify with more than one race on the US Census. Therefore, we see that in the United States, accepting the multicultural identity has proven its own level of difficulty. So that's why open-mindedness is an extremely important value to us, because even in society, it's been an issue with accepting who we are as people. Resilience. And resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from challenges. Multiracial children and adolescents have been shown in studies to be very resilient. They are less likely to be subject to a stereotype that threatens to cause poor performance on tasks. For example, being a Black male, they're often categorized as solely athletic or just good for whatever they can do physically, as opposed to intellectually. And even though a Black male may have the capacity to be a neuroscientist or a biologist or whatever intellectually challenging, like a mathematician, it will often be hindered by the stereotypes that are placed around them and propagated in their society. So therefore, they perform lower in areas, let's just say, in regards to intellect. And in addition to this, going off of this idea of resilience, this may be because multiracial people are more likely to understand that race is not biological, but rather it's a social construct. So either way, it's easier to dispel some of the stereotypes that counteract productivity in the other person's life, because they understand that the stereotypes don't necessarily apply to them. And that is the values. So the next topic that I want to hit on is the behaviors and patterns of communication that are different as it pertains to being a multiracial identity. So while multiracial adults they share things in common, which they don't share a lot in common, but they can not be easily categorized. So their experiences and attitudes differ significantly depending upon the races that they are made up of and how the world perceives them. So, for example, multiracial adults with a Black background, 69% of whom most people would view them as Black or African American, their experiences are more closely related to their attitudes and social interactions are more closely aligned with that of the Black community. And then a different pattern emerges among multiracial Asian adults. Biracial white and Asians adults feel more closely connected to whites than they do Asians, so that's interesting. And then among biracial adults who are white and American Indian, ties to their Native American heritage are often very faint. Only 22% say that they have a lot in common with the people in the US who are American Indian, whereas 61% say they have a lot in common with whites. The Pew Research found that multiracial adults are less likely than other adults to be college graduates. They are less likely to be currently married. And when they do marry, they are more likely than other adults to marry someone who also is multiracial, which ties into that microcultural aspect where people marry within the same group. So, and then another fun fact is that mixed race adults often have other multiracial friends and neighbors as opposed to more so than the general public. Another thing is that behaviors and patterns that differ from the dominant culture is that there's a focus on strong bonds between multiracial siblings. So studies have shown that there has been multiracial people who have described a deep understanding and connection between the mixed race siblings. They often, that's their partner in the world, since they often view themselves as lonely inhabitants of a world unique to them. Another common strand of thought is that there's a sense of being stuck between two worlds. We are always tempted with the daunting question of who am I? Where do I belong? Who's my group, so to speak? And in addition, there's also a noticeable difference in the way families of different, of multiracial children. So family relations can range anything from acceptance to hatred or somewhere in between. They may deal with glares, strange looks, and comments about their family structure. Negative societal reactions to one's race are problems that deeply affect the well-being of even the biracial or multiracial parents. The biracial child and family will often meet disfavor quite regularly, and this is something that I know to be a personal thing. And then interesting facts is that 29% of biracial adults previously thought of themselves as one race. Another fact, number 2, 50% of biracial adults in America are white and American Indian, which I would have never guessed, but it makes sense. And then number 3, the multiracial population will triple by the year 2060. Number 4, 55% of multiracial people say they've been subjected to racial slurs and jokes, which is not surprising. And then number 5, 61% of multiracial people do not consider themselves to be multiracial, since race is often seen as fluid. Number 6, the legalization of interracial marriage happened in 1967 following the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Loving versus Virginia, which finally normalized multiracialism. I'd like to close with saying that it would be wise of you to be less quick to stereotype, especially if someone's racially ambiguous. And it would be also wise if you became more acquainted with the lifestyle of a multiracial person due to the growth of this microculture, even in the United States. And that is my microculture of being multiracial.